The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the parade ground slick and glistening under a pale stretch of sky. Rows of recruits stood stiff and silent, their boots dark with mud, the weight of expectation heavy on their shoulders. Among them stood Elena Vorsk, her posture straight, her face unreadable beneath the brim of her cap. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other cadet, gray uniform neat, hair pulled tight into a braid, but there was a quietness about her, a stillness that seemed carved from stone. She had learned, long before arriving here, that silence could be a weapon. At 17, when the world she knew collapsed under fire, silence was what kept her alive. Years later, when she signed the enlistment papers with calloused fingers, that same silence followed her, not as an enemy, but as a shield. This morning, it hummed inside her chest like a low drum as the commander paced the line. His boots struck the ground with sharp authority, the metallic click echoing through the damp air. He stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. "You," he barked, voice carrying enough weight to make 2 recruits flinch. "You think you belong here?" Elena met his stare without blinking.
She didn't speak.
Words were fragile things, easily broken in places like this. The commander smirked, circling her like a predator testing its prey. "You're soft. Look at those hands, no scars, no grit. Did they tell you this is a game?" His laughter was short and sharp, a sound meant to slice through whatever confidence she carried. Around her, a few recruits shifted uneasily, the air thick with discomfort. Elena's breath stayed even. She had scars, but none the commander could see. The worst ones weren't on her hands. They were etched deep inside, where no amount of shouting could reach. She kept her eyes fixed ahead as he leaned closer, voice dropping into a sneer. "Let me guess. Daddy's little girl? Wanted to play soldier?" He tugged at her sleeve, exposing a sliver of pale skin, as if peeling back her resolve layer by layer. For a moment, the ground seemed to tilt beneath her boots. Not from fear. She had buried fear long ago, but from the sudden, searing pull of memory, the smell of smoke, her brother's voice vanishing in the roar of collapsing walls. She swallowed it down. Every ounce of grief pressed into silence. The commander straightened, unimpressed by her stillness. "Pathetic," he muttered, loud enough for the others to hear. His words struck like stones, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her fingers curled slightly behind her back, brushing the edge of her shirt where ink met skin. The tattoo had been there for years, hidden like a secret vow. She remembered the sting of the needle, the artist's quiet hands, the image blooming slowly, a skull entwined with a serpent. To anyone else, it might have looked like menace. To her, it was memory made permanent. Life, death, and the fragile line between. Boots shifted. Orders barked. The drill resumed. But inside Elena, something burned, a steady flame fed not by anger, but by resolve. She wasn't here to prove herself to a man like him. She was here for those who never came home, for promises whispered under a sky ripped open by fire. Every drop of sweat, every ache in her bones, it was all a way of keeping them alive, if only in her heartbeat. As the day stretched on, the sky cleared, turning an unfeeling blue. Elena moved through drills with relentless focus, her body absorbing each command like a blade learning its edge. By evening, her muscles screamed, her palms raw against the rifle grip, yet she didn't falter. Pain was familiar, it was honest. Unlike words, it didn't lie. When lights out came, she lay on the narrow cot staring at the ceiling, the barracks filled with the soft chorus of exhausted breaths. Her shirt clung damp against her back, the ink beneath it pulsing faintly in the dark, as if alive. She thought of the commander's smirk, his voice dripping with disdain. A corner of her mouth curved, not in defiance, but in something quieter, deeper. Let him laugh. Let him doubt. One day, when the truth was no longer hidden, that laughter would die in his throat. For now, she closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of boots outside, the whisper of wind against the metal roof. Tomorrow would come hard and merciless. She would meet it the way she always had, silent, unbroken, carrying her ghosts like armor no one could see. The morning broke with the sharp clang of a bell, dragging the recruits from shallow dreams into another day of merciless routine. The barracks stirred like a restless hive, boots thudding against wood, uniforms tugged into place, breath misting in the early chill. Elena rose with the others, moving with quiet efficiency, her braid tied back tight, her face set in calm readiness. Outside, the parade ground was still wet from the night's dew, the soil dark and heavy. A low fog hugged the edges of the field, blurring the world into shifting shades of gray. The recruits lined up, the cold biting at their fingers as the commander's whistle pierced the damp air. "Push harder. Faster," he roared, voice carrying over the clatter of boots and ragged breaths. His gaze darted between faces, lingering whenever someone faltered. Elena ran with the others, each stride cutting through the mud, the weight of her pack grinding into her shoulders. Her lungs burned, every inhale thick with the smell of earth and sweat, but her pace didn't break. Around her, bodies stumbled, curses spilled, but she pressed forward, her silence as steady as her heartbeat. The commander's eyes found her again. She felt the heat of his scrutiny even before his voice lashed out. "Vorsk," he barked. "Is that all you've got? You move like you're half asleep." The recruits glanced sideways at her, quick, curious flickers of attention. Elena didn't respond. She had learned that sometimes the cruelest thing you could give a man like him was nothing at all. But the commander wasn't satisfied. As the drill ended and the recruits collapsed into the dirt, he strode toward her, his boots cutting sharp prints into the ground. He stopped a breath away, his shadow falling across her bent form as she steadied herself on her knees. "Stand up," he ordered. She rose, her chest still heaving, her eyes fixed forward. He circled her again, the way he had on the first day, his smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Still think you belong here? You look like you'll break in half before the week is out." A flicker of laughter rippled through a few recruits, brittle and uncertain. Elena stood unmoving, her silence a wall between herself and their mockery. The commander leaned closer, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "What are you hiding? Some weakness? Or just a coward's fear?" His hand brushed against her shoulder, tugging at the fabric of her damp shirt as though daring to uncover what lay beneath. Her pulse quickened, not from shame, but from the weight of the moment pressing against her ribs. The tattoo lay hidden, inked into her skin like a vow, aching to breathe. She clenched her hands behind her back, the urge to speak rising like a tide, yet she held it. "Not yet." The whistle blew again, scattering the recruits into the next round of drills. The commander stepped back, his smirk returning, and barked new orders. They ran obstacle courses until the fog lifted and the sun bore down, turning mud to steam. Elena's uniform clung to her skin, her breath rasped raw, but her rhythm never faltered. Every climb, every fall, every crawl through the grit became an act of defiance. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. By midday, their bodies sagged with exhaustion, sweat dripping into their eyes. The recruits sprawled on the grass during a brief respite, gulping down water, whispering fragments of complaint. Elena sat apart, her gaze tracing the horizon where the fields met the sky. She let the quiet soak into her bones, steadying her heart. One of the younger recruits, a boy no older than 19, dropped beside her. His face was pale, freckles standing stark against his sunburnt skin. "How do you do it?" he asked between gasps. You don't even flinch when he goes after you." Elena glanced at him, her expression softening. "Flinching doesn't make the shouting stop," she said simply, her voice low, almost carried away by the wind. The boy nodded, chewing over her words as if they were something more solid than rations. The whistle shrieked again, dragging them all back to their feet. As the sun slid lower, shadows stretching long across the field, Elena felt the day's weight pressing into her bones. Yet beneath it all, there was a steadiness, a flame that no exhaustion could smother. She thought of the commander's taunts, of the sneer that seemed carved into his face. Let him push. Let him tear. One day, When the ink on her back caught the light, he would understand. When night came and the barracks settled into weary silence, Elena lay awake once more. The ache in her body throbbed with every heartbeat, but her mind was calm. The tattoo pressed warm against her skin, hidden but alive, carrying the weight of promises too sacred to name aloud. She closed her eyes, her breath slow, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the muted sounds of others around her. Tomorrow would come again, relentless, demanding, but she would rise, as she always had, with silence as her armor and resilience as her truth. The sky was bruised with storm clouds when the recruits gathered on the training field, the wind snapping against their uniforms like an unseen whip. The day had already been long, hours of crawling through mud, climbing walls slick with rain, running until their lungs burned, but the commander wasn't finished. His voice, hoarse yet sharp, cut through the gusts. "Discipline isn't built on comfort," he barked. "It's forged in breaking points." The recruits exchanged weary glances, their bodies trembling from fatigue. Elena stood among them, steady but drained, sweat and rain mingling down her temples. Her silence remained unshaken, though she felt the storm not only in the sky, but inside her chest. The commander's gaze swept the line, and as though pulled by instinct, it landed on her again. His lips curled into the familiar smirk that carried mockery like venom. "Vorsk," he called, stepping forward, boots sinking into the wet ground. Front and center. She obeyed without hesitation, her movements measured, her eyes fixed ahead. The mud squelched beneath her boots as she approached. Around her, the other recruits stiffened, breath held tight in their throats. They had seen this before, the commander's fixation, his need to break the quiet one who never bent. He circled her slowly, his words carrying for all to hear. "You think silence is strength? You think staring me down makes you a soldier? No. Soldiers bleed. They sweat. They scream. And you." He tugged suddenly at her collar, pulling it aside as if to expose the fragility he was so sure lay beneath. "You hide." Gasps rippled through the line, the air itself tightening. Elena did not resist. She stood rooted, her breath steady even as the fabric strained under his grip. The damp shirt gave way, slipping from her shoulder, and for the first time, the ink beneath was laid bare. The tattoo sprawled across her back, bold and unflinching, a skull entwined with a serpent, its curves alive with shadow and depth. The serpent's coils wrapped tight around the bone, its fangs poised at the edge of eternity. To the recruits, it was striking, even unsettling. But to Elena, it was memory carved in permanence, her brother's last words, the fire that swallowed her childhood, the vow she had carried into every step of her journey. The commander froze. His hand, so quick to tear and mock, hovered in silence. His eyes lingered on the ink, his smirk faltering, his voice caught in his throat. For a long moment, the storm outside seemed to still, the recruits held captive by the unspoken weight of the image. Elena felt the air shift. She didn't turn her head, didn't break her stance, but the stillness of the commander told her enough. The man who had mocked, who had needled and sneered, now stood stripped of words. Her silence deepened, not as defiance, but as truth. The wind rushed over the field again, carrying with it the metallic scent of rain. Around her, the recruits shifted, their eyes no longer on the commander, but on her. In the lines of her back, in the ink etched into her skin, they saw not weakness, but something fierce, something unyielding. The commander cleared his throat, stepping back as though the ground beneath him had turned unsteady. His voice, when it came, lacked the bite it once carried. "Fall back in line," he muttered, almost to himself. Elena drew her shirt back into place, her movements deliberate, unhurried. She returned to the ranks without a word, her silence now a mantle the others could almost feel. Training resumed, but the rhythm had changed. Orders barked, boots pounded, yet the recruits carried a new current among them. They glanced at her with something different, respect, perhaps, or awe. And the commander, though he still shouted, no longer singled her out with the same cruel precision. When evening fell and the recruits filed back to the barracks, Elena lingered at the edge of the field. The storm had broken, leaving the air heavy and damp, the horizon washed in muted gold. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze trace her skin. In the quiet, memory stirred. Her brother's laugh, the crack of fire, the promise whispered through clenched teeth, "I'll carry you with me." The tattoo burned faintly beneath her shirt, alive with the storm's echo. She opened her eyes, steady once more. Tonight, she would sleep with the same ghosts, but lighter somehow. Not because the weight was gone, but because she had shared it, wordlessly, through the ink on her back, through the silence that had never betrayed her. And for the first time, even in this place of breaking, she felt unbroken. The years after Bootcamp passed like a tide, slow, relentless, carrying pieces of her into places she had never imagined. There were deserts that swallowed sound, nights lit only by tracer fire, mornings heavy with the scent of iron and dust. Elena had walked through them all, her silence no longer a shield but a companion, steady as breath. When the war ended, the noise didn't. It clung to her like smoke, shouts across radios, the pounding of rotors, the sharp crack that split the air before darkness swallowed everything. Some nights, she woke to the echo of it, her hand clutching the sheet like a rifle grip, the taste of fear bitter on her tongue. But daylight came, as it always did. And with it, life in smaller, quieter forms, the hum of traffic, the creak of an old apartment floor, the hiss of a kettle in the kitchen. These sounds startled her at first, soft in ways the world had forgotten to be. Slowly, she learned to trust them, the way one learns to trust the ground after years of sleeping under foreign skies. Elena found work at a small mechanic shop on the edge of town. Her hands, once trained to dismantle rifles and thread tourniquets, now moved with equal care over engines slick with oil. The smell of grease clung to her like a second skin, but she didn't mind. There was a strange comfort in fixing something broken, in hearing the cough of a machine turn into a steady hum. Yet even in this new life, fragments of the old one lingered. The boots by her door were scuffed but polished. The walls held no photographs, only shadows. And every morning, when she dressed, the ink on her back stirred beneath her shirt, as if reminding her, "You carry more than scars. You carry stories." One evening, after the shop closed, she sat on the hood of an old truck, watching the sky bleed into twilight. The horizon glowed amber, the first stars trembling above it. The air smelled faintly of rain, and for a moment, it felt like Bootcamp again, the field washed in gold after the storm, her body aching but unbroken. Her thoughts drifted unbidden to the commander. She wondered if he ever remembered that day, the sudden hush when the tattoo emerged like a secret long kept. Perhaps he had forgotten, swallowed by the tide of his own battles. Or perhaps, in some quiet hour, the image returned to him, carrying a weight he hadn't understood then. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. She had endured. Not in defiance of him, but in honor of everything she loved enough to fight for. The wind brushed against her hair, lifting strands like whispers. She closed her eyes, letting the memory of voices come and go, her brother's laugh, the cadence of soldiers calling cadence, the soft prayers murmured into bloodied earth. They were all here, stitched into the fabric of her being, alive in every breath she took. Her phone buzzed on the metal beside her, a message lighting the screen. "Veterans meet up tomorrow. You coming?" Elena stared at it for a long moment, her thumb hovering. She had avoided such gatherings before, afraid of the silence between strangers who had all heard the same thunder. But tonight something shifted. She typed back, "Yes." When the sky deepened to indigo, she slid off the hood and started home, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The streetlights flickered on, halos of gold pooling on the pavement, and in their glow, she felt the weight of the years ease just a little. At her door, she paused, catching her reflection in the narrow window pane, the braid trailing down her back, the curve of her shoulders, the quiet strength in her eyes. She thought of that girl on the parade ground, the one who held her silence like a blade, who endured every sneer, every doubt. And for the first time, she let herself smile. Inside, the apartment was still and warm. She shed her jacket, unbuttoned her shirt, and stood before the mirror. The tattoo stretched across her back, dark against pale skin, the serpent's coils as sharp as the day they were inked. She traced it with her fingertips, feeling the raised ridges where ink had bitten deep, sealing her promise to the ones who never returned. Tomorrow, she would meet others who carried their own marks, some visible, some not. And maybe, in that small room, surrounded by voices that understood, the silence would feel less heavy. For now, she turned off the light, the darkness wrapping her like an old, familiar cloak. She lay down, the hum of the city outside her window blending with the steady rhythm of her heart. Elena closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, the night felt gentle. The community center smelled faintly of coffee and floor polish, its wide hall lit by soft pools of yellow light. Folding chairs formed a loose circle near the stage, a scattering of people already seated, men and women with faces carved by years of service, their postures carrying both strength and fatigue. Some wore old unit caps, some civilian clothes, but every gaze held the same unspoken thread. We were there, and we came back different. Elena paused in the doorway, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. For a moment, she considered leaving, slipping back into the comfort of solitude, the safety of silence. The hum of conversation drifted toward her, warm and low. Like a tide, she wasn't sure she could wade into. Then a voice broke through, calm and inviting. "You coming in or planning to hold up the wall all night?" She turned. A man in his 40s stood nearby, his frame lean but solid, his hair peppered with gray. His smile wasn't wide, but it was real. Elena nodded, her throat tight, and stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a hush. She took an empty seat near the circle's edge, her boots scuffing lightly against the floor. Around her, voices rose and fell, fragments of stories trading hands like worn coins. Lost time, lost friends, the strange ache of returning to a world that had gone on without them. She listened, each word landing soft but heavy, stirring echoes she had long kept buried. When her turn came, silence stretched like a fragile thread. Dozens of eyes, steady but gentle, rested on her. Elena drew a breath, the air cool against her lungs, and spoke for the first time in a long time to those who might understand. "My name's Elena," she began, her voice low, edged with quiet steel. "I served with the 12th Recon." The words felt foreign at first, as if pulled from some distant version of herself. But then they came easier, carried on a current she hadn't realized was waiting. She spoke of the dust and the heat, of nights when the stars felt close enough to touch and mornings that smelled of blood and gunpowder. She told them, not all of it, never all, but enough for the weight to shift, just slightly, from her shoulders. When she finished, the circle held her in silence, not the brittle kind she had known at Bootcamp, but something deeper, kinder. A few nodded, slow and knowing. No one pressed for more. That, she realized, was the gift of this room, the permission to carry what you needed and to set down what you could. Later, when the chairs emptied and the hall quieted, Elena lingered near the window. Outside, the night spread vast and starlit, the glass reflecting her face like a ghost. Behind her, footsteps approached. The man from earlier. "You did good," he said, his voice low. "First time's the hardest." She offered a faint smile. "Didn't think I'd say a word." "Most don't." He hesitated, then added, "You coming next week?" Elena looked past him, through the window, to the horizon blurred by city lights. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I will." When she stepped into the cool night, the air smelled of rain and distant pine, the kind of scent that tugged her back to fields and fog. She walked slowly, boots tapping against pavement, her breath a pale cloud in the dark. The tattoo beneath her shirt felt warm, alive. The serpent coiled still, the skull watching with hollow eyes. It was no longer just a memory of grief. It was a map of survival, inked in lines that told her she was still here. Halfway home, Elena paused at a park bench beneath a flickering street lamp. The wood was cold beneath her palms, the hum of the city distant, softened by the hush of wind through bare branches. She sat, elbows on her knees, letting the night settle over her like a second skin. She thought of the girl who had stood on the parade ground, silent under the weight of mockery. She thought of the commander's laughter snapping like a whip, the tearing of fabric, the gasp when ink met daylight. She thought of how far she had walked since then, through storms of dust, through oceans of dark, to this quiet bench under a broken light. The silence now felt different. Not the shield she had once held so tight, but a bridge, a space where grief and strength could stand side by side without shame. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from the same man. "Glad you came tonight." She stared at it for a long moment, then typed back 2 words. "Me too." The wind rose, carrying the faint sound of laughter from some distant street, the promise of something more than survival. She stood, the night unfolding ahead of her like a road she no longer feared to walk. And as she moved into the glow of the next streetlight, the ink on her back shifted with her steps, a living mark of where she had been, and the strength of where she was going.